Welcome to episode 67 of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an X-Men the Animated Series weekly recap podcast. I'm Rod. I have, as no surprise to anyone, been drinking because we're doing this remotely, and this wasn't my favorite episode. However, I have learned the last few episodes, as we talk through them, I dislike them less or like them more. This is going to be a fun episode, mainly because of how much of a lightweight I am now and how my brain is putting things together.
And I'm JC, and my only disappointment is that when we decided to go from trying to truncate episodes into single episodes for multi-part ones, that we do not actually ever hit episode 69 in the series until the launch of X-Men 97. Because technically, that is still the same continuity for us. So season 6, episode 1 is going to be episode 69, but we have to wait until the fall for that.
There you go. Look forward to that one. Look forward to the funny number.
Looking forward to 69. Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly podcast series where we're going back and watching every single episode of the original 1992 X-Men the Animated Series and posting them online in their original intended script order, building up to the release of X-Men 97, which is coming to Disney Plus later this year. This is our second to last episode of this show, and that feels very weird to say, Rod.
That is really wild that we've watched the whole show now, minus the very last episode, which we're hoping to have something special for.
In about 14 months, we went through the entire show.
It's only been 14 months? It's funny because it feels both like...
Sorry, 15 months, because our first recording session was January of last year.
Okay, yeah. It's still just wild to think about, like, not only rewatching the show, but going back through and picking through them in detail.
I mean, we spend more time going through the show than almost every episode. In certain cases, double or once or twice nearly triple the length of those episodes.
Yeah, that is also partially, if not a lot, to do with my tangential thought processes.
I thought you were going to say it was because of the Nightcrawler episode.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, there was, Nightcrawler month, so...
Yeah, Nightcrawler episode definitely skewed our average episode length.
Every Joe on the show so far gets a month. And some quick reminders, we're a recap show about a series that started now over 30 years ago. There will be spoilers. If you don't want spoiled for you, pause the podcast, watch the episode, and come back. We'll do our best to avoid mentioning anything about future episodes we haven't covered yet. We're currently not sponsored or affiliated with Disney or Disney Plus in any way. However, Disney, we have one episode left to go.
And we're recording in like 2 weeks, so that doesn't work because the episode will have already been recorded by the time this one goes live.
If you want to do it after the fact, I'm not picky about when the bill comes.
Don't forget to follow us on social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Instagram, TikTok, if that still exists, Twitter, if that still exists, and Facebook. Yeah, social media is weird right now. And of course, make sure to follow us on your favorite podcast services if you just kind of randomly came across this. Also, full episodes are posted to YouTube and to Facebook in case you weren't aware. Finally, we record these episodes in batches, so if we're reacting to any news about the upcoming series, we're going to be behind. We got no news.
I think the only thing that's kind of a little bit of news is, I believe, a press release and maybe another podcast had revealed loose general details about the 97 series. Was that Magneto was going to take over the X-Men. I think we all kind of knew that by this point. And
we knew that from San Diego in the summer. Yep.
And then Sinister is going to be the main villain.
Sure. That is, if that's the case, that is new. I definitely saw his artwork, but I don't remember hearing he was going to be the main villain.
I only mentioned that because you'll see how relevant that is.
Of this episode?
Yeah. And also, thinking about that out loud, once again, makes this episode a little bit better for me than I had originally evaluated. I don't know words right now. Now on to the show. Today we're going to be talking about Season 5, Episode 9, titled Descent. It aired September 6, 1997, and currently sits at a 7.5 star rating on IMDb. 97, man.
Are you having a stroke?
No, I'm just drunk. You missed the point earlier before we started recording where I asked Lucy, my cat, for anybody just listening. Well, everybody's just listening. We don't have video. If she was good.
Anybody who's a new listener?
Lucy's my cat. I was like, we're going to record one more episode. Is that okay? And then she just yawned at me. So that's how exciting I am. But yeah, this second to last episode, I would argue, now I haven't watched the very last episode yet, Graduation Day. I would argue that this sets up 97 better than what I remember of Graduation Day. But I guess we'll find out next week.
We'll find that out next week. So one comment before we get into this episode. The greatest thing I think could have been said by Eric Lewald and the writer of the episode was, I'm not sure why they let us do it. They were happy they got to do the episode, but they're not sure why they were allowed to, which is awesome.
Allowed to, like, the story, or just do this many episodes?
This story.
Oh, okay. Oh, like, is that the topic of eugenics?
Well, I think it was more of just like, you have the second to last episode of the show, and it does not have a single X-Men until the last 20 seconds of the episode.
I didn't even think about that. And it was basically an origin story for a villain that we won't be able to revisit in that time period.
Not in that time period.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember if Sinister appears in Graduation Day at all, but yeah, no.
Wow. Okay, so that, I think that goes back to what I said last episode, or not last, 2 episodes ago. I'm finally keeping my timeline straight. 2 episodes ago, when I said I think there's a section of these episodes at the end that you could watch sprinkled throughout the rest of the show, not necessarily in this timeline, like this order.
Right.
And it may make more sense because if you saw like this episode before seeing Sinister in the other, or even during the Sinister things, it might not better, but it would have made as much sense as it does now. But this episode opens up with Big Ben striking. I have midnight. That sounds wrong because it was daytime. Was it noon? I guess.
No, it was at night.
It was a night. Okay. Oh, it was a night. Drinking, and I think that was a shorthand of we're in London.
It was we're in London, and based on the way that people were dressed, I was like, oh, 1800s, and then immediately after it shows that it was 1888. So I was like, okay, dope. Yeah. I have my relative time frame of vintage clothing picked apart in my head, so I did great there.
Yeah. Once again, maybe it's just a testament to the tropes that were going around when we were kids watching a show, or like our predispositions or whatever, but I got the same impression. And also in this next shot where there's like a lone woman kind of like evading a stranger chasing her, I was like, oh, this is very reminiscent of the Jack the Ripper stories. Let's hold on to that thought for later. But then she does run into the guy that's been kind of in the shadows tracking her, and he has like glowing red eyes. And then I was like, oh, okay, it's Sinister then. Or some other bad guy, because that's red eyes in this universe.
Something very important from this is, we obviously, let's not beat around the bush. There is some allusion to Jack the Ripper here, no doubt. And it's actually sprinkled throughout the episode really well. So you see this person run away who almost gets to this woman. They're running from the cops. And then we find out that it is in Whitechapel. And that is the area, the district of London where Jack the Ripper was known to be.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it is not even is this Jack? It's like, no, they are definitely shy of saying the Ripper. This is Jack the Ripper.
So this was potentially a lot of our generation's first taste of true crime. No, that's not true because we had Unsolved Mysteries.
Yeah, but they also talked about like aliens on that fucking show. So
yeah, my hometown was on Unsolved Mysteries.
I'm not shocked.
It is because, to my knowledge, this is still true, a frequency that makes people terminally sick. Not terminally like as in you're going to, well, maybe you're going to die, but like you won't ever get better from it. Also, no one's left that town, so...
Just you. It's literally just you.
Right. Also, my health got better after I moved, so not saying it's related, but...
But it's related.
So, yeah, he's like... JC said this red-eyed man is running from the cops. That sounds like a slur, and I don't know why. But this red-eyed man runs from the cops, and he knocks over a street cart vendor.
Very violently.
Yeah. So this poor guy gets knocked over. He's just starting to get up, and then this like horde of like almost comedically Benny Hill type cops also knock over the street vendor. But several of them, like there's not just like one cop, it's like 5 or 6 of them like knock over this poor street vendor. We never revisit the street vendor. He's probably got broken legs by this point.
So for like a half second, I legit thought that the cops were going to confuse him with the person they were chasing and beat the shit out of him. Like there was a half second pause of, am I picking this guy up or am I going to beat the shit out of this guy? Like, I was like, oh, are they just going to totally mistake this guy as the red-eyed lunatic?
Same. I thought that too. I was like, well, what else would have been the purpose of running into him? I was like, I guess to slow him down.
Yeah.
That's why they couldn't catch up with this guy. Sure. And then that's when we got the title card says, it's 1888.
Yes.
I like that kind of implies that was a big, like we didn't know.
It's a full fucking century, dude. Like I said, all I knew was 1800s.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, like, I guess what I thought was like maybe they were like, well, this could be in present day, especially to American kids, like looking at London.
True, we were and still are uncultured swine. Right. So, real quick note, the significance of 1888. The murders that occurred were between April 3rd of 1888 to February of 1891. So it was early Jack the Ripper timeline.
Man, it's wild is that I think if it hasn't already started happening, it's not out of the question for it to happen in our lifetime of actual tragedies that we lived through becoming like pop culture fair, because people who actually lived through the Jack the Ripper stuff, it probably wasn't like that lax or, fun or entertaining to talk about. But now we're talking about like, space people and mutants and stuff.
Our generation literally just missed the Zodiac Killer, Dahmer, so we're not far from having the things that happened when we were 8 or 9, having that shit be pop culture from a revisiting scenario. And that was the big thing. Jack the Ripper, at the very least, was not put into pop culture until years and years later. It's not the same as like the Dahmer murders, where it was like, oh no, there's still people's families who are alive that know they lost somebody to these killers. So
yeah, because that was he was in the 80s, right?
I don't know off the top of my head if it was 70s or 80s, but it's enough that our parents were alive when that was happening. Whether you and I were is debatable off the top of my head.
Seeing stuff about him in the news. So if his crimes weren't happening in the 80s, then something of his trial was happening in the 80s that I remember seeing something of. So I guess the closest thing we've come to that is like that Netflix show that kind of like sexualized him a little bit.
That's what made me think of it being like, because that's where people were saying like it's pretty fucked up that you guys are making a story about these people being killed and their real life relatives could see that story right now. And it's not like somebody's grandkids who never met them. It's like, no, like literally that person's mom or that person's sister is still here in aware of everything that's going on.
Yeah, so.
But X-Men.
Yeah, X-Men. And then we kind of zoom into a building where there is a Dr. Xavier.
Yes.
Who, if you don't, I guess that's why they put the title card of 1888, because if you don't know that this is like impossible that's the same Xavier that we know, it looks like he's in some sort of like really like half-assed disguise. Because it's still the Professor Xavier like character model, but he's got like the mutton chops and the
voice.
Yeah, an exact same voice.
Yeah.
This introduces a couple of possible weird, questionable continuity things, but once again, I think because of the way the stories are set up, we're not supposed to think about it that much.
Or I have some thoughts and explanations as we go through those. So.
Okay, sure, there you go.
Yeah.
And it sounds like we pick up at the tail end of a conversation where Xavier's trying to convince this, I guess it's like a constable or a detective.
Whatever, some sort of leadership position within the London police,
that he knows who the killer or where this criminal is and stuff, and then the constable's like, you trying to tell me all this was done by a man in the 60s?
And that's where we actually get the reference that is happening in Whitechapel.
Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't catch that. And then Dr. Xavier is like, Dr. Nathaniel Essex is no ordinary man. You'll be proud of me, I did recognize that.
Good. I'm very happy.
I think I just knew it because of Essex Corp is like a sinister storyline thing.
Also from Deadpool 2, it was the Essex School, which was where the Juggernaut was and stuff, right?
Okay, yeah.
Or not the Juggernaut, the other kid. They were trying to...
Kids, yeah. Which I guess is potentially going to be revisited now that Deadpool's a Disney princess.
He basically says, he doesn't believe that Essex is human anymore, and then he kind of gives the, philosophical maybe he never was. And that he's been tracking him all over the world.
It's not creepy at all.
To end up back in London.
Right. It was always with you all along. I don't know wherever that moral of the story is.
It's the murders we had along the way.
There you go. I will give them credit with the writing on this. There's this clever back and forth of the A and B storylines. So as Dr. Xavier is telling this story, we're seeing the chase of the Jack the Ripper type guy running on the streets. So we're kind of being implied that this is Essex being chased by the cops and stuff. And
yeah, that was the impression I got, that it was actually Sinister who was Jack the Ripper. That's what impression I was getting out of this.
Yeah. And I've made a note here that I like that there was I don't know if it's just 90s trope, but especially 90s cartoon trope where the villain is nice enough to wait for the cops to catch up before he keeps running.
Right.
Instead of getting a lead. Yeah, and Xavier says that he first met Essex in 1859 when he saw him speak at something that Darwin was attending, which...
Well, sorry, clarification on that. He knew Essex because he was the doctor for the Grey family that Essex was married to the daughter. And yes, that is relation to Jean Grey's family.
Oh, okay. I didn't put that together. But you know what I did not have in my 2023 bingo card? Darwin showing up in the X-Men animated series.
Charles Darwin, not mutant Darwin.
Yeah. And they reference Origin of Species. I'm guessing that's a public domain book because they didn't have to blur out the cover like they did with Beast reading the book.
It is very much a public domain book, yes.
And so not only is he a cameo, Darwin comes back a couple times and is kind of pivotal to a lot of Sinister's like origin story, which I don't know if that was from comics or was ever addressed in the comics, but that is wild to think about.
It makes a ton of sense. And granted, I have not read any of the books that had to deal with Sinister's specific origin. By the way, you could leave this in. I just saw Rod's cat get up and walk and almost thought she was going to jump onto the keyboard of his piano. So I had a small heart attack.
She does like to play little solos for us every once in a while.
Yeah, every now and then. But yeah, it has always been a part of him, the belief of what evolution is, how it can be kickstarted within generations and stuff like that. So Darwin was obviously influential, especially Essex being a man of science in London in the 1850s. That part I do know is accurate.
Yeah, so I feel like the way that this show is set up, it would have been like really easy. And what they normally do is be like, oh, I've read Darwin's stuff or whatever, and then that influenced him to do this.
Yeah.
Him actually like having several interactions with Darwin is almost to the level of like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, historical figures like Tom Sawyer's part of our crew. It was just wild. I mean, it was still cool. I think they did it pretty well. Once again, I guess, enough time has passed that like Darwin's family's probably not trying to defend his depiction in X-Men the animated series.
I mean, I think it goes into when you're of a certain public perception, like you can't defend it actually. Like
yeah. It's kind of like the president or something, right? Like you're such a widely known name or whatever.
Yeah, and I think as long as you're not, slandering or something like that to the person, like you can't really do it. Yeah. Well, then again, Darwin probably would have just given up by the time he started seeing, cartoons and stuff like that.
Right.
So, yeah.
And so they're in this like lecture hall basically hearing Essex give his I don't know, I guess dissertation or something about his theories and stuff. I like this detail. I don't know if it was just me that noticed or this is super purposeful. Not all, but a good chunk of the characters in the background are straight up sleeping, which I thought was a great touch because they did talk about him being a little bit of a heretic during that time.
Right.
So much so that even Professor Xavier was kind of religious. We'll see more examples of that.
James Xavier, not Charles Xavier.
Sorry,
yes.
Dr. Xavier, not Professor Xavier.
Yes.
Dr. Xavier is even a little... So that time period was so early on that even an Xavier was somewhat... or even if he was religious...
super religious.
Well, like religion was like folded in with the science. It was like one and the same. And so it made sense to me that people wouldn't take what Essex said seriously because... that speech, even in the 90s timeline of the X-Men, would have been a little bit edgy, up until the point they actually saw the X-Men in action a lot. Mm-hmm. So back in the 1800s. But it's just crazy to think that it's just people like asleep because they think it's not even absurd. It's just like not true and boring.
It's like you're just listening to a lunatic and they just, I mean, granted, there are aspects of it that there were definitely the fanatics who did this, but we also, in hindsight, have learned that certain ways that, like, not everybody believed the Earth was flat. Not everybody was vocally against evolution. But there were, like, the super religious types who were like, oh, yeah, evolution wasn't a thing. I mean, literally, we still know that there are people... Yeah, there's still people fighting that today.
A number that's not zero.
Yes, something that is greater than zero.
So Essex in this lecture says that mankind is overdue for the next evolutionary step because, and he kind of has a little bit of argument with Darwin about this, is because it's called natural selection, things that have stayed in like the natural progression, it would be logical for them to go through the natural selection process. But since humans have kind of like removed themselves from the natural process with like industrialization and things, that humankind is due for like an, I guess, unnatural evolutionary step. And Darwin's like, oh, back it up. That's not what I was talking about.
Right.
And I had here Darwin kind of attaboys Essex.
Yeah, I mean, he basically is like, oh, yeah. And then he warns him. He's like, yeah, maybe chill with the shit you're saying out loud as we're walking through these hallways.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Forgot about that. He was kind of in, not cahoots, but he was like, you and me know this, but if you don't want to be burned at a stake, keep that shit to yourself.
Yeah, his phrasing was to be cautious about free thinking.
I wish that was an outdated warning.
The problem is now free thinking is actually not free thinkers, so they kind of co-opted that phrase.
Well, it's not even free thinking. It's just like, I was talking to my brother about this, and if for some reason you haven't listened to the other episodes, my brother's a pastor. Our whole thing is like, no matter.
I think it's important to give that in case there are people who aren't listening to every episode.
Whatever your beliefs are, a core human aspect that's more mature or at least grown up is to at least have the empathy to see other people's perspectives, even if you don't agree with them. And I think that's more of like that. It's more that than free thinking. It's like, maybe your beliefs don't line up with someone's lifestyle, and that doesn't affect you.
Maybe chill the fuck out.
But yeah, and then Evan said, this was all like after the lecture. They're like talking as
they're walking through a hallway.
And I thought this was this wasn't a complete surprise because they're all in the same room, but it was even more wild for Darwin to introduce Dr. Xavier to Essex. I was like, the X-Men characters interacting with real life historical figures. It's just crazy to me in the context of the show. So in this X-Men canon, Mister Sinister gets introduced to Xavier's grandfather, I guess, or grandfather?
Think grandfather.
The
way the age breaks down, I mean, we could look it up, but why would we do that?
By Charles Darwin, in the middle of his book tour for Origin of Species. This is like wild. During the time of Jack the Ripper, there's so much stuff that's happening right now. Okay, so this is definitely happening. So this is getting better the more I talk about it out loud, because this sounds insane.
Speaking of not looking stuff up, I did just look stuff up. Yes, Charles Darwin was absolutely a part of the formal character history of the comic book version of Sinister as well.
Gotcha. I mean, I guess it tracks. It's just it was like a rare circumstance in this show, or something like that. And this is where I got the impression that Xavier had a little bit of a religious belief and stuff, because
he wasn't subtle about it, dude. He starts talking about immortal souls and shit like that. No, he definitely was religious.
And then I don't think they ever come back to this, but Darwin seems sick. He keeps coughing?
He was coughing. Was this the tail end of Darwin? Because I don't know enough about him as a historical figure to know when he died. So I didn't know if they were going to take in the reaction of Sinister starts proposing these theories to Darwin, but then Darwin dies before we could actually get the resolution of it. Something like that. Yeah,
or Sinister cures him, or I don't know. At this point in the series, it could be anything from Darwin coughs once. It turns out he's a Flarkin or something, You had
to go with the Flarkin.
Well, that's because that's the only time in my head I think of somebody coughing and they end up being something crazy.
Right.
Eat Sinister. End of episode. Thanks for watching.
That would have been a hell of an end to the episode, no doubt.
And then after Darwin leaves, Dr. Xavier asks Essex about Rebecca, which we figure out through the context clues is Essex's, I'm going to say Sinister's wife.
There you go.
Who is being treated by Xavier because in this time it was not formal or
it was essentially a conflict of interest to treat your own loved ones,
which I guess there's probably some merit to that.
I mean, considering what we see later in the episode about the dude literally conducting experiments on his own wife. Yeah
So we don't know a whole bunch about Rebecca. I'm not familiar with her if there's any comic stuff.
She's part of the Grey family.
Okay, so wow, so this is giving me greater context for when Sinister appeared earlier in the show.
Sinister was married to a relative of Jean, yes.
And that's how he was kind of aware of Jean Grey's family lineage and her...
I have not read enough of the Wikipedia entry to answer that formally.
I mean, I think even just in the context of this,
of this show, yeah.
It's that gives enough of a history of why you would target this specific woman and her husband and stuff.
And the fact that she has, one of the strongest psychic abilities on the planet. That also helps.
Oh, man. Now that makes me want... Okay, well, later on, when something else happens to Rebecca, I have another insight that I just thought of. But right now, though, it also makes me wonder, was Rebecca targeted by Essex? Because I'm not sure...
I didn't get the impression that he was going down the dark route until he wasn't able to treat his own wife. I think that was kind of the inflection point that made him go dirty with his process.
Gotcha. Anyway, so now we kind of have the reason that Sinister is going on his mission.
Right, and he also straight up accuses Dr. Xavier of not knowing what's wrong with her. And I was listening to a friend's podcast called 30 Morbid Minutes, and it's a great podcast. Shout out to Elise and Jessica for that one. It is an awesome podcast. But they started talking about there was something from London roughly at this time frame that was listing causes of death and what we would eventually learn them to mean. And then like certain things that were just like, oh yeah, it was because they inhaled like too much smoke and that's what killed them and stuff like that. So it's totally plausible that there were things that we could diagnose today that back then they were just like, it's the shakes, and it's like that doesn't actually have a cure to stop the shakes.
And wasn't that something similar, like maybe in a similar time period, consumption ended up being like tuberculosis?
That was one of the things that gets mentioned in that particular episode, yes.
Totally unrelated to the last few years of what the real world has been dealing with. That was kind of my argument for when these new, pandemic stuff comes up. Not saying that we won't eventually figure out how to better handle things, but right at the current moment with the information we have, maybe we err on the side of safety.
Nope.
That's going to be my ongoing way of thinking personally. So even though now it sounds ridiculous of like, oh, they had the shakes back then. Well, if you didn't know and you did something that didn't hurt anybody else and it maybe kept you safe, we'll figure that stuff out later, but let's err on the side of safety.
I mean, I don't remember particularly what year it was discovered, but they didn't know that germs were a thing up until like the last 200 years, I want to say.
Yeah. So
like literally they did not know that germs existed and spread through the air. So
yeah, and we don't know what we don't know now, Like,
exactly.
I personally, I won't get too much into it, but I have a thing that I dealt with like pretty much my whole life ever since I was like a teenager. And then it wasn't until my late 20s, early 30s that they were like, we've been studying this thing for 10 years. Turns out it's a thing. You most likely have it. Cool. So for 15 years of my life, I was being treated for something else.
Yep.
And then it wasn't until like my mid-late 30s that there was like stuff developed that like could actually kind of help me out or whatever. So it was like, we discover new things. That's what science is. And then we update the information. It doesn't stay the same forever. Anyway, we're an X-Men podcast. So even though Dr. Sinister, Mister Sinister lashes out, is kind of like that TV version of lashing out. He like immediately apologizes. He's like, I don't know what came over me.
Also, I think that fits into the classic. He is a well-to-do person within the British society too. So even if he doesn't believe it, he still has to pretend he's calm. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for that to happen. Like he still has to put on the facade.
Yeah. And also he probably, if he's wealthy, he probably is used to just getting things fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So it's probably extra frustrating to not have control over something like that. I mean, for anybody, but let alone someone who's used to getting it their way all the time.
Well, and then the modern version of Sinister in the comics is very much like on the seats of Krakoa, which is the governing body there. And constantly, as soon as he is not in the room with them and he starts doing his like whole like self monologue thing, all he does is talk about how every one of them is an idiot and dumber than him. So he definitely believes he is smarter, especially than the guy who can't figure out what's wrong with his wife.
Yeah. And to his credit, he was right, because I think Xavier to himself in an inner monologue later says that he didn't have the heart to admit that he didn't know what was wrong with Rebecca.
Yeah.
Which that's another whole ethical problem. Like if you're this woman's doctor and you're not telling anybody that you don't know what's wrong, like it's a problem.
Leeches! Give her more leeches!
Right. Like, holy cow. I understand protecting your profession, but like how long have you been, not treating this woman who's dying? And then we see Sinister go to his wife alone, and he needs to take another blood sample from her. She is surprisingly lighthearted for being terminally ill.
Oh, that's because they were giving her fuck tons of opium off camera.
That's probably true, actually, especially for the time period, or God knows what else, right?
I'm going with opium.
Like, well, those elixirs had everything in them, right? It was like
liquid opium.
And so she asked if she's his wife or guinea pig, and I was like, that was dark.
Yep.
Okay. And then he just.
But also, she's high as fuck, so it's okay.
Right. And so he's like, that's funny. Anyway, so he takes more blood.
Go to my asylum.
Right. And in Xavier's telling of Sinister's whole like backstory and everything, in a really diplomatic way, basically reveals that Sinister kind of recruits mutants and sells them to circuses? Is that what I'm supposed to get
buys them from circuses.
Buys them from... Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought he was selling them to circuses.
No, it was essentially like human trafficking is how he was getting people to experiment on, was finding somebody from these, circuses, and he was essentially buying the performers who would be considered freaks.
Wow, that is so much more worse than I had originally written down.
No, he was not doing it for profit. He was getting the people who were already anomalies. Yeah. And then, using them as a basis for experimentation. Because even if they weren't what Magneto would see as Homo superior, they were splits in evolution. So he didn't care if they were the perfect ones. He just wanted to fuck with their DNA.
So that makes Rebecca's guinea pig line way darker. Because this followed directly after that. Also, it's way darker because that has happened in human history. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. So Xavier shows up, and so does Darwin, at Sinister's next presentation. And Sinister has kind of marketed this to be his irrefutable evidence.
It's going to be a big reveal.
Yeah, that evolution has taken a huge jump within humanity.
In a single generation.
Yeah. So, super accelerated.
And then he calls them the men of tomorrow.
That is a very of the time description.
That's the shit you would see at a World's Fair. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to our credit, our generation, we had the whole Y2K, the millennium. Remember when everything was about millennium? It was a Backstreet Boys album. It was Robbie.
Sir, that is called marketing.
Right.
And that Robbie Williams song was fucking great.
Yeah, no, I loved it. But that was our whole aesthetic was that neon blue light flare.
Yeah, we had 3 years of that, and then it happened, and it was shit is the exact same as the 90s.
Yeah. And then the next turn of the decade was Party Pop, and the turn of the decade after that, we had a pandemic. So
yay!
So they show up.
Good old roaring 20s.
Right. I guess we're repeating history. Wait, so... Ooh, okay. Battening down the hatches for depression.
Wow, that's too real. This'll age well, Rod.
Right. All right, that wasn't unintentional, I think.
Most accurate prediction you've made aside from Kamala Khan being a mutant.
Right, and that was completely by accident.
So was this.
Jesus. Okay. Anyway, at this presentation, Essex has two men who we presume are mutants because that's what he's kind of advertising them as to us. One of them shows that he has electrical powers, but in a
he has
way.
Static electricity, basically.
Yeah, so he's able to kind of lift some little nodes on a panel or something. And then another mutant who he just referred to as Mr. Flannery, and he's able to hold a beaker and boil the water in his hand. I was kind of divided on this because I was so Darwin was super unimpressed, which I get because they're kind of
violently unimpressed.
Yeah. Because they're kind of low key. However, this is also the same time period where they still believe in things like leeches and all this shit. It seems proportionally it would have been pretty amazing. I guess he said parlor tricks, so maybe they're just used to the circus acts or something.
Right, and I think that's what I got out of it is this is the kind of stuff that people who are running circuses, people who are doing bits on street corners and stuff like that, there's a plausible explanation as to how it's being faked. Mm-hmm. Is I think why Darwin is oh, you couldn't have shown me something if the guy made a fireball above his head, I think he would have been more impressed. But all this is a thing looks like it was pretend heated in his hand,
Yeah, or I guess less sexy, but if the real world scenario was happened, Sinister's a scientist or a doctor, and he should be able to show the proof of work to someone like Darwin, So the demonstration would probably be the cool act, but then also all the mechanisms proving that it was not a parlor trick. I don't know what that would be because I'm not a scientist, but.
Or a magician.
Right. Yeah, neither of those things. Because I can't do science or lie. Sinister begs him to stay, saying that they have the potential to have mastery of their own bodies, and he can show them proof. But Darwin's having none of it and leaves, and so I guess that's probably that's a villain origin story, right? For Sinister, he got kind of scoffed at by his hero.
Right, and that's the moment where he takes the leap too, because essentially he's saying we can become gods, and it's
that's right.
you jumped from trying to prove something via science to this is for power. You do not want to become gods for selfless reasons.
Which is me and a few friends, we always
are trying to become gods. Yep.
That's true. Yeah. We kind of joke just be nice to people because they might be wrong. They're probably wrong, but it only takes one of them to be right enough. Because Sinister doesn't necessarily become a god, but he becomes enough trouble.
I mean, he's kind of immortal right now, so.
Yeah, but if you didn't give him that reason to prove you wrong, it would have been a very different history.
Right.
So then we go back to Xavier telling the story to the constable, and they have like furthered their search for this person they believe to be Essex, and they come across like a really gnarly looking corpse. We only see the foot, but it either looks not human or like really messed up from whatever happened.
And it's also in the East End, which is the area where Jack the Ripper was.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
I think I do remember that. I don't know why.
They dropped in the East End. They dropped in Whitechapel, like we talked about. Mansell Street, I believe it was, in my cursory Wikipedia search. Those all line up.
Oh yeah, then they said that they need to go to Mansell Street next.
Yes.
And then while they're going there, I think even Xavier's is like, let me tell you the rest of the story as we go along our carriage ride.
Yeah, he point blank says, I'll finish up the story on the way.
Which, to their credit,
it's a great framing device.
It's a great framing device, but also in that time period, those are long journeys. You know, like, I don't know if you've finished Last of Us yet, or any of those shows.
One episode left.
Oh, God. Okay. I mean, I don't know if you know how it... Anyway, I'm not going to say anything else. But any of those shows...
Yo, let's spoil our own show, not other people's shows.
It's not... Any of those shows where it's not, like, modern transportation. I think I at least always forget, like, oh, yeah, that's not just, like, a 5-minute ride down the road. Like, they're probably taking a decent amount of time. Yeah, there's plenty of time to tell the story. He continues that Essex was expelled from was it the Royal Society? Like, or was it the Grey Asylum? I couldn't figure out, like, what the actual name was.
Didn't write it down specifically, but essentially he was expelled from the group of learned men of London. Him and Gray, Rebecca's father, became estranged, and he was just consumed with mutation as his only thing that he studied.
Yeah, it said he became a recluse and became experimenting more, which, you know, check in on that guy. That's never a good sign.
Yep. And then he starts experimenting on himself. First, he basically watched something get created. It looked like he was trying to showcase a cell splitting or a cell becoming something new. And he's like basically saying like he's now a creator, which is the pursuit of being God. And then he drinks a vial, which turns his skin white.
That was my note. It was like Essex has a breakthrough and then does something that makes him even more white than he was. I feel like being East End of London is like, that's pretty far down the spectrum.
Yeah. So he reaches over and he actually burns himself and then immediately recovers from burning too.
See, that should have been the presentation to Darwin.
Like lighting himself on fire.
Yeah.
He didn't drink the white stuff yet. He didn't experiment enough on himself. He had to go crazy first.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And my note says here, after his breakthrough, he goes full Frankenstein because he sees the thing that you said like in the microscope, and he's like, "I've done it." I was like, "Wow, that's a lot to put on this like tiny little discovery." But sure, I don't know how that works.
Again, we are not lawyers. We are not scientists. We are not animators. There are very few things that we actually are. The list of things we are not is longer. So
and the best part is, at least you know the comics. I'm not even an expert. I'm broadly appreciative. I actually really do love this show. I just can't retain too much of the story. Then it kind of takes like a time leap, and Rebecca is just healed, and Xavier is there and doesn't know why, which is another good sign for your literal personal doctor.
And then, you know, they kind of like, they're excited, and then she's a little bit like weirdly giddy, which again, to our earlier joke that I don't think is as much of a joke anymore, is her just having these opioids in her system that make her so happy. Because she's like, yeah, Nathaniel was giving me treatments, and then her dad instantly freaks the fuck out.
Which, yeah, because she's... Because in my head, like, I don't even think we ever see proof that she's actually better. She might just be high and ignoring it.
I mean, I feel like Xavier is examining her, so I kind of trust Dr. Xavier to at least know that she's not dying anymore.
You know, to that effect, I either forgot to read it or forgot to write it down. Earlier in the episode when he was treating Rebecca, he was like, I had the greatest advancements in medical technology. And they cut over to his, like, briefcase with the doctor's stuff, and there's straight up, like, a saw in there.
Yeah. That was high-tech shit back then. That was metal that probably wasn't going to infect you.
I get that, but I guess that's what pops in my head when I think of like, but her doctor was checking her. It's like, the doctor had a saw on his thing.
Why do you not like saws, Rod?
I guess he didn't use it on her that we know of, so who knows?
Yeah, we actually didn't see she's missing a foot. It was replaced by like a fucking wooden leg.
Yeah, and then she laughs. She's like, "Oh, he promised me not to tell, but Nathaniel's been treating me." And yes, that's probably one of the times he learned like not to trust his wife with secrets.
Yeah.
So father-in-law was upset. Then they pay a visit to Essex. This is still in the flashback, and my note was, "He's 90s cool now."
Yes, he has sunglasses on, like, inside the house. Xavier is trying to speak to him. He basically says he's no longer a doctor, and then Xavier mentions everybody's concerned about his sinister experiments. And obviously it's heavy-handed, but it's like, ooh, I kind of like that.
Oh, you know what? That your reply to that just made me realize what my note here meant, because my note said Sinister experiments when he gets knighted. It's because they said your Sinister experiments, and then Sinister was like, I'll remember that when I get knighted by the Queen.
Yes.
That's what that note meant. So he actually predicts that he's going to be knighted by the Queen, and then he's going to go with Sinister, and she's not going to find that suspicious at all.
It was a different time, Rod.
Right. Same Queen. No.
That's so fucked up.
So he leads Xavier to a dungeon where there are an astonishing amount of prisoners to be that confident about showing someone.
All the people that he was having trafficked there. Yeah.
We have seen them, not individually, but like in small groups or individuals earlier in the episode. We see them all at once. Like, this is like, not that it's okay to have any prisoners, but this was like a large amount of prisoners.
Yes. So this is where it had to be the cartoon version of it and not what we would see in the comic books. Because in the comic books, there's this ongoing thing with Sinister of all his failed experiments, and the dude just leaves a fucking pile of corpses wherever he goes.
I guess he did leave the one that we saw in the story, but that wasn't even him. That was the henchman.
Yeah.
And this part, well, yeah, you're saying like they're all still alive and still very vocal about not wanting to be experimented on. So it's like, I guess he's just extracting stuff from them.
Or he's doing such light stuff that it's not actually making their like bodies explode.
Yeah, but it's super painful, I guess, because these prisoners are very vocal about like, you won't believe what he's doing to us and stuff, and
to the point where they don't trust Xavier, who is also a doctor. He's like, no, that's what he told us before.
You know, I get that though. Just like, we've seen you guys be buddy, and he also said he was a doctor.
Yeah.
So Xavier does try to free them. He like knocks the keys out of Sinister's hands and tries to like free them, and then they get into like a scuffle.
Right, and the two of the prisoners are able to use their one uses his powers to essentially push the keys to the other one, and they're able to open up all the cells, and everybody runs off.
Yeah, so then when the mutants all get outside, or I guess they're early mutants is what they are.
Yeah.
One of them accidentally shoots fire, and you know if Sinister was there, he's like, why couldn't you fucking done that when Darwin was here?
Yeah, seriously, you fucked this up for me, sir. If you had done this, I'd still be a hero.
And he does it in front of cops. So that's... Oh, was it cops? I can't remember actually now.
It was a guy who was on a wagon. It was not necessarily a cop, no.
So he's on a wagon, and he specifically called these escaped mutants the children of Hades.
Yeah, so he calls them demons, children of Hades, and then Sinister refers to them as his children, too.
Yeah, so he's like, so I am Satan.
Yep. So they end up using their powers to escape. One runs into the church, and Xavier follows, and the dude's praying. And that's where we get the moment of him not believing Xavier is willing to help him because of what Essex did to him.
Yeah, and he followed him into a church after he escapes.
Yeah. They start to walk out, and Xavier defends him to the people, saying, he was essentially a victim. He's not a demon. And then points that Essex is the monster. And then everybody turns their attention to him.
This is 2 times in a row now this happened. This is the one time I've had my timeline straight. So in last week's episode with Michelle, it's like the Guthrie father, you should bother them, not my son.
Yes.
And then deflects to the X-Men. This is the same thing. Xavier's like, don't bother this poor guy Flannery. That's the guy you want to get.
But this time it's at least accurate.
It's
at least warranted here.
Yeah.
He gets whacked with a shovel and then instantly heals.
And then they're also freaked out by that. I wonder what's the morning after like for this town after they witnessed all this?
I don't know, man. like we could joke about certain things. There is nothing in modern society that has happened that is this level of unreality taking place. Like, there's human behavior, and then there's scientifically this does not make sense. How did this fucking happen?
Yeah. Be careful what we wish for. Still.
Yeah, the it can't get any worse trope ended after the 7th time it got worse.
Right. What was it when the government declassified all the UFO stuff and then changed the name of UFOs?
To UAVs. Yeah.
Yeah, and then everybody was like, we don't care because it's like the 7th thing that happened this month.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like, oh, remember those bees from Africa that are going to possibly kill us? Like, it was literally like, this can't get any worse. And it actually just kept getting worse every single week.
The only thing, I guess maybe this is the Challenger universe. The only equivalent to this that we would see in current days, if we had physical mass sightings of aliens, actual extraterrestrials in person in several locations at the same time.
Can't wait for this prediction to come true, Rod. Thanks.
Right. You're welcome.
You're fucking cursed. So Essex unleashes like a Jubilee-style lash blast and then runs off and goes back to his wife.
And he tries to escape with her, but I think she's the first person to notice that he doesn't look right?
Yeah.
She's like, what's wrong with you? Because not even Xavier, we didn't mention this before, Xavier sees Essex and he's like, doesn't mention that he has literally, not white like as in super pale Caucasian, like paper white skin.
Yeah.
And so she sees it and she's like freaked out. She's like, oh my God. And then she puts together, she's like, you did that to you. What did you do to me?
Yeah. And then he grabs her by the wrist and it's you're hurting me. And then the glasses get knocked off. And that's the first time for Sinister we see the glowing red eyes.
Yeah. And then that just sends her over the top. This is where I mentioned earlier in this episode, like it's got me thinking, did what Sinister did to Rebecca set off the chain of events for mutant stuff to happen to the Grey family for Jean? Or at least push Jean along to what she became?
I think it's supposed to be ambiguous that may have been a factor of it.
Because maybe it just healed Rebecca, but it and maybe she was a little older to have any like DNA changing or whatever. But
so the only reason I would say I'd hope that wasn't the case is Sinister ends up escaping. We're skipping over a few small things, but they say that she never spoke again. So I am really hoping died. Yeah, there's not some like awkward arranged thing. Yeah, but yeah.
Gotcha.
But yeah, he says, that they are going to be the Adam and Eve of a new Genesis. And I think to your point, that's a little bit of what he's tried to do with Scott and Jean too.
Yeah, he never let that go.
Yeah, and then deadly Genesis and stuff like that are terms that do get used in the X-Men stories throughout, the history of the books and stuff. So
and he escapes on horseback.
Jumps out a window and then gets on horseback.
Which super almost swashbuckling.
Yeah. And then the mob just burns the house down and all his notes and everything like that.
I thought that was kind of hilarious. That they saw him leave. I guess,
and then they're like, "Fuck this place!"
Right. I guess their goal was both to let out all that energy, but also whatever he was doing here, we wanted to end. But Xavier said that he saved his journal.
He got the journal. Rebecca never spoke again, and then he would continue to pursue Essex around the world. And then seeing kind of, I think he referred to it as the aftermath of what happened with these new men.
And there was a side comment Xavier made about these mutants escaping to the sewers. And so to me, that said that was one of the earlier Morlock.
A form of Morlock, yeah.
Stories. I know this is in London, not New York, but basically the underground mutants. Or also probably help explain why they weren't really prevalent until the 90s in this timeline. But yeah, he travels around the world looking for Essex. And then, like you said, it was the murders that we had along the way. So he was back in London.
Yep.
And he tracked Essex to an upstairs flat.
Right. And then we get kind of a little bit of it can't work that way in real life, but the way it's presented to us, we think that Jack has just arrived with Sinister with the samples. They actually acknowledge that he murdered somebody. They said, I wanted this one alive. It's straight up acknowledged that it is murder.
Oh, yeah. And then, and Sinister calls him Jack. And he's like, oh, it was Jack the Ripper.
Yep. So... And he says that he wouldn't be called Essex anymore. He is Mister Sinister. So I kind of liked it because the way it was flowing, especially at the start where, you don't know if the guy with the red eyes is Sinister or somebody that he has powered up. It was like, oh, is Jack the Ripper Sinister? And that was, made clear throughout the episode that Ripper was essentially just a henchman of Sinister in this world.
Yeah. And that's how he kind of got the physical advantage he had to pull off all the crimes he did in that time period. Yeah,
why he didn't get caught and such.
Sinister never got to fulfill his destiny of revealing his name to the Queen of England. Had to be Jack the Ripper.
You don't know that.
Well, he picked the name at that moment, right?
So, yeah, the cops arrive. The room is essentially empty. All there is a single candlestick sitting on a copy of The Origin of Species. And then we see that Essex is actually on a boat, already long gone and safe from being captured.
Sinister was also a theater kid, because that was so dramatic.
Dude, the early Sinister was very horror. The modern Sinister is a mix of horror and theater kid. No doubt. It is fucking... What was the Johnny Depp musical?
Oh, yeah, about the barber.
Yes.
I some musical friends are going to kill me, but I know what you're talking about.
Yep.
If only I had the internet in front of me. Hang on. Sweeney Todd.
Yeah, Sweeney Todd.
And now I have Murder Barber movie in my Google search history.
That's why you're supposed to use a VPN. And if one of them was sponsoring us, I would shout them out. Do us a favor and use code Cyclops IWFM Pod in any VPN when you sign up, and just let us know what happens.
We get like a
hashtag not sponsored.
We get like an email like a week from now. I was like, well, I don't know why, but we keep getting this coupon code system.
Yep.
Then we take like a really random cutaway, I guess, to tie it back to the original show, and 90s present day Xavier, Professor Xavier, wakes up in the dead of night because this is a Professor Xavier thing. He had fallen asleep reading Origin of Species, and that copy that was autographed by Darwin.
Well, it was the one that his father or grandfather, whichever person it was, left to him. So
yeah. But I love that that's your casual nighttime reading.
Is an original copy, like first edition, signed by Darwin, Origin of Species.
Yeah. Yep. Any of those details alone, and then all together.
The one that your family definitely passed the story along to you of whose book that was. Like, that's not I'm leaving this for my grandkid. It's like, wait, what?
That's like that Christopher Walken story. What movie was it that he was talking about? Like his grandfather had like saved this family heirloom watch in his butt through the war.
Oh, it's called Death Note.
Wait, what?
I legit don't know the movie you're talking about.
Anyway, or maybe I made that up. Once again, I don't know what timeline it came from.
So Death Note might be more accurate than what you were thinking of.
Probably, yeah. And that's pretty much the episode. The only two like things that I came out of this was like, hey, from what I remember of Graduation Day, and maybe I'll be wrong about this does not lead into it at all. So not like a real tie-in. However, the rumors...
Which... To also be clear, we talk about that with last week's episode. There are certain things that get laid out but never resolved because the show is over, and they knew that it was coming to an end. But like Project Wide Awake is brought up for the first time in that episode and then never gets readdressed.
I'm still disappointed that didn't pop up in Jubilee's Fairy Tale Theater because, we're really counting on that reference. Nope,
that was out of order, Rod.
I know. I think we even addressed it in...
Oh, yes, you did. Yes.
we're like, maybe that'll happen 2 weeks before this or whatever. But the other thing about this episode was based on the supposed like information we have now about the 97 series and Sinister being a big bad, or at least one of the big bads. This feels like a more appropriate end to this part of the series then, because this left such stakes for Sinister that I feel like we kind of addressed in this show, but not to the level they raised it to from this, Right. Now we have all these loose ends about like what the fuck happened to Rebecca, and like where were all those years between Sinister from London in the 1800s through when he tried to like, I don't know, do like genetic experimentation on Jean and Scott. There's a whole bunch of stuff between that.
I mean, he made like, he formed the Nasty Boys, and he got the cape to be even wilder and semi-organic and such. His outfit is organic too.
Oh yeah, that's right, because it heals with him and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So he's walking around naked technically.
He's Donald Ducking it everywhere. No pants.
Donald Ducking.
Once again, we'll see once we watch the last episode what I think, but I almost would have rather this been like the end, right?
Yeah, but there's no way you could have that be the end. Imagine if that was the last episode. Comic book stores would have been burned to the ground in 97 for that.
Yeah, I mean, it almost already was because how random these last few were. Like, I'm kind of glad that I wasn't actively watching it this time, because I can only imagine being like my favorite show coming to an end, and then the last month almost completely never addresses the rest of the continuity.
Right. I mean,
I guess this one sort of did, but
that's more the executives kind of doing it, because I have so much faith in Eric and Julia and the writers that were a part of this show, that it was really people were making decisions that they just had to stick to, because at the end of the day, you're making a cartoon, somebody's paying for that to be produced. Mm-hmm. So if they're saying, if you don't do this, we're not going to pay for the friggin' show,
Yeah. And I think I said this about the last episode, too. This one, not so bad. I think I would have preferred this episode, with the animation we're used to in it. Although it wasn't that bad this time around.
Yeah, I feel like this was the B team animation, not the C team.
And if it was, like, at almost any other time in the timeline of the show airing.
Right, like even seeing this before, maybe not the Phalanx episode because we had a little bit of a, redemption of Sinister, but even if this was before Beyond Good and Evil, and it's like, oh, yeah, Sinister is a piece of shit, here's a part of why he's a piece of shit.
I think I'd almost, if I was recommending to some friends who haven't watched this last season or the show at all, maybe even taking this like last batch of episodes, still watching them in the 5th season, but pushing them up to the start of the 5th season, just so like more like the canonical stories are like kind of like satisfying together through the, I don't know. I know there's the whole thing of like, oh, this is the order you're supposed to watch Star Wars in to make it make more sense. I'm like, no, just keep it. Yeah.
Whatever the fucking script order is the order I trust. End of the day, I trust the vision of whomever created the show.
Mm-hmm. I get that.
Instead of, long shot popping in at weird intervals throughout that didn't make sense,
Sinister was a lot better in this episode than I remembered him to be, so I guess I'll give him that much credit.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he's going to be way goofier.
We got one episode left of the original X-Men 92.
It's hard to believe. Are we confirmed on the guest yet?
Not yet. Not
okay.
Because we don't know if the guest is going to be on that episode or the guest is going to be a standalone episode. So I don't want to announce it until it's formalized.
Yeah. All right, yeah. So
but know that we have more guests, and just for clarity, while Rod and I are figuring out exactly what we're going to do, the show isn't over. There may be a week off or something like that, but we're still going to do other X-Men content, most likely related to the shows or movies, though. Like, I'm not going to get Rod into reading comics weekly. That's realistically just not going to happen, guys.
I would actually love it. I just don't. I have a hard enough time remembering TV shows, let alone comics. I'm the biggest Mortal Kombat fan. During lockdown, I read all the Mortal Kombat comic books. That was one of the things. I bought all of them and read them. I don't remember a single thing from them except death, but that's Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
But with the shows, I know you mentioned Evolution, which I'm totally down to watch.
We still have to do Pride of the X-Men.
I think my vote would be Pride of the X-Men next, but I guess maybe should we like poll listeners like what should be next?
I mean, let's make a separate post and ask people that, and
yeah,
can you say something offensive on TikTok that gets people to engage with it?
Maybe. The best part is I don't have to be offensive. People will just figure out things to be upset about. Even on my personal Instagram, I reposted something from TikTok where I talked about how Dolly Parton once covered a Collective Soul song. That was so offensive to people.
And it was accurate. That's the best part.
Even though it was a fact. They're like, how could you say it about Dolly? It's like, because she did it. Also, what was wrong with it? Like, there's Pride of the X-Men, there's X-Men the anime.
And then there's Wolverine and the X-Men.
Yeah, and then the movies potentially. I would love to not watch the movies, but I'm down. And so I don't know. I guess, we'll have a poll up to see, what maybe we should watch next. I think Pride would be really funny, though, especially because you haven't seen it.
I think we're going to do Pride regardless. The question is just like, because the problem is Pride is only one episode, so it's got to be a special rather than, I think the question we need to ask people is, what series do we dive into next? And we'll list all those options. So it's Evolution, the anime for X-Men, the Wolverine anime, and then Wolverine and the X-Men. Those are our 4 options.
I haven't watched any of those except for the anime. Even though I love the anime, I would venture to say that would probably be the least interesting to cover because I loved it, but it's so slow. But that's part of the reason I loved it. So I'm not sure.
I mean,
that'd be the most eventful thing to talk about.
I think I watched the first episode at 2 a.m. during lockdown one night. So I don't have anything preconceived with any of them. I do know that Evolution has lots of fans around it, and Wolverine and the X-Men has a lot of people who love it. So those are the ones I'm more excited for personally, but
yeah,
whatever TikTok tells us, we'll do.
Yeah, I think this is dangerous. I think we'll put those in front of the queue just because I just know because of my taste that other people won't be interested in it. Because like Jules Verne's novels, right? Journey to the Center of the Earth. The exciting story that a lot of people think that they know and love is not the actual book. I love the book, but there's also like an entire chapter of just like the contents of what they packed on a horse. I thought it was fascinating. I know that the general public does not give a shit about that. So much to the fact that they cut that out of nearly every adaptation.
As they should.
Yeah. So the anime, when they like spend long, drawn out amounts of time doing certain things, I'm like, oh, this is great. But I know that whoever's watching with me is like, is this over yet? So I'm not sure if that'd be the most exciting thing to do commentary on, but I'm down for whatever. Like I said, I haven't watched it in years, so who knows? I might be remembering it wrong.
We'll get through it all eventually, I'm sure.
But yeah, Evolution sounds cool. I'm not familiar with the Wolverine one, so
It's just the one that ended about a decade ago. That's all I know.
Jesus.
Yeah, there has not been. I think we looked it up on a previous recording. There has not been a show since 2011, I want to say.
Yeah, I think like I had this realization because
as long as you and I have both been in Los Angeles, there has not been a new X-Men cartoon.
Yeah, and my niece, she's not quite 10. I just realized like her whole generation and some kids even older than her, they grew up with no X-Men, really.
Which is bullshit.
It's wild because like X-Men was our thing. They grew up with Avengers, A-Team or whatever.
And they've also had, because of the movies, really great Avengers cartoons too.
Yeah, so...
Oh, you know what? Let's also throw in the list. Like, you guys want to see the Spider-Man episodes that have the X-Men in it? Sure, let's fucking throw those as one-offs too.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I'm down.
There's like a whole Secret Wars episode, so Rod can have that movie spoiled for him.
I think I know some of it. I don't know. I was so confused. The good news is all the different comic universes are so convoluted that
it's very true.
Different.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us. If you have any thoughts, make sure to drop them into the comments for either the YouTube upload or official Instagram post about this episode. If you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on the podcast app of your choosing. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and CastBox. We got one more of this series.
I'm going to go make mac and cheese.